pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Stay right there. Will you tell us your names and the grade you're in, please? Go ahead. Ellie, you go first.
Hi, my name is Eliana and I'm a fourth grader.
Awesome. Do you have a favorite thing about school?
Math.
Nice.
Hi, my name is Leanna, and the one thing I love about school is the
Great. And did you get outside today? With all the snow, not today. So we have a little thank you for you. This is really hard to do. This is a hard-sized audience to be in front of, and I'm so glad that you came together and that you treated us to your voices and saying the pledge. So we're proud of you for doing that. We have a little thank you for you. So here's a certificate that you can put on your fridge or a scrapbook or wherever you'd like, and these are super fun. And maybe you could give one to your brother too, since he's nice enough to come in. Is there another brother? Oh, hang on. We got one for you too. We got a little brother too, so we need two more?
sister.
What? How many kids are there out there?
We're gonna out here, her sister and brother are not here,
Okay,
and then her brothers are here, you know that.
so let's cover who's here, because that's what we have tonight. So you take them with you. Thank you again for coming. You're welcome to stay and welcome to go. Thank you for coming out.
Thank you.
Always the best part. We will get going. Tonight is a night for public comments, and so I'll ask if there's anyone in the audience at this time who would like to make a comment.
He wants everyone to know.
If there's anyone who would like to make a comment at the podium, thank you for the signal, appreciate it. We have minutes up for approval, I'll ask for motions.
Can I make an amendment to that? Just two things. One of the items was to purchase a bucket truck. It has sold, so we have to remove that. There's a roll call, so I know Matt's disappointed he can't do the roll call for that one. So that, and then we have a walk-in agenda 2 that I wanted to point out. We had a couple interviews today, and if we didn't approve them tonight, it would delay their start by another 30 days. So we did a walk-in for 2 probationary teachers and some other personnel items that were on there as well.
Okay, great, thank you. So minutes up for approval, I'll ask for motions, please. Jenny and Jen, questions or comments? All in favor? That carries unanimously, thank you. And warrant approval, I'll pass on behalf of Amy and Milton.
I'll second, yeah.
Thank you. Questions or comments? All in favor? That carries
One
unanimously.
quick question.
Yeah.
How can you have a 2.5 probationary period? I thought the minimum was 3.
She's been here for a year.
Oh, she already works for us? Oh, okay. How does she work for us?
She's one.
Oh.
All set? Okay, so did we get a full vote on the warrants? Let's do that face to face. All in favor? That carries unanimously. Great, thank you. Macy, you are. Hi. Yes.
Alright, so today in student government we had kind of a craft day, and that was a lot of fun. So we put out a bunch of hearts for all the teachers and staff in the building for Teacher Appreciation this month, and we're gonna hang them in the atrium at the end of the week for Valentine's Day. And with Valentine's Day, we're also doing anonymous student Valentines, so they can send them to each other, their favorite teacher, little canned soda, and it's like a orange, like flavored crush soda, so yeah, they're cute, and it was fun to like cut out all the little cards, cause they were like, you're my Valentine, whatever. More important things that we're doing is CA Ball, and that's a kind of big fundraiser for the year. We donate everything to the Special Olympics, and that's kind of like my detail, so I'm really excited about that. Last year we raised over $1,000, and I was so proud, and I can't wait to do it again. In NHS, we're
And just making, the board aware that this Thursday at 7 a.m. is the ID pinning ceremony, a morning session. If you wanna get up really early, 7 a.m. at the Academy LGI. Several of us will be there and, excited to be part of it. So you're all welcome to join us, and that's all I had. I kept mine short tonight because I know Matt is doing a longer presentation. So save it for him when the time comes.
Do you know if coffee's involved at that 7 a.m.?
It's not, but if you'd like, I'll pick some up for you.
Let's see, we have the water treatment plant. I'll ask for motions, please. Julianne, Beth, questions or comments? Whenever you're ready, Matt.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Miller?
Yes.
Mrs. Persnielli?
Yes.
Mr. Palomini?
No.
Dr. Schneider?
Yes.
Ms. Tessendorf?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Mrs. Grimm?
Yes. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Tonight's educational presentation is a focus on an initiative that's been in the works for quite some time, dating back to 2019. And the topic is on the Blue Ribbon Commission and what's known as a Portrait of a Graduate. So to give you a little bit of context and background, before way back in 2019, the state kind of commissioned themselves to investigate what are the requirements for graduation and what does the state want to see all of its high school graduates really leave high school with. And so a commission was started called the Blue Ribbon Commission on Graduation Members back then. At the time, the state then began to work on a process to gather stakeholder groups from all across the state, obviously. You can see the range of folks listed here, from parents, administrators, school personnel, higher ed, business community, et cetera, to try to help kind of revisit and re-examine not only what are the requirements for graduation, but give consideration to what is the experience like for our students as they progress through high school in New York State. And so as a result of all of the feedback, really this Blue Ribbon Commission has come up with a series of 12 recommendations that can really be captured by 4 major transformations. This concept of adopting what a portrait of a graduate is, and there's a graphic I'll show you in just a little bit that kind of gives you a little bit more detail on what they're envisioning with that. They've asked to redefine and re-examine what learning credits and what credits are, and what credits will be required for graduation. Giving consideration to what our current diploma requirements are, and that ties to not just coursework, but examinations. Many of you maybe heard in the news more recently in the last few months, Regents exams possibly not being a requirement. So I'll get into that in just a little bit. And then a transition from 3 potential high school diplomas as we have now to a singular universal New York State high school diploma. So with the 12 recommendations, they really can be captured by these 4 broader transformations, and I'll give you some of the details of all of those in just a little bit. So I referenced the portrait of a graduate. This graphic really encapsulates what they're hoping students exit high school with: being a critical thinker, a problem solver, literate across content areas, culturally competent, social emotionally competent, an effective communicator, and a global citizen. Some districts across the state already have something similar to this. In fact, they may have already developed it prior to the Blue Ribbon Commission's recommendations about graduation requirements and what a portrait of a graduate is. We do not have a lot of detail, however, on exactly what all of these things entail. I can make some overarching connections to what it means to be a critical thinker, problem solver, and literate across content areas, because those things are pretty transparent in all of our classrooms. Those are things that we really want to make sure our students are engaging in. As you get into the other elements of the portrait, cultural competence, social emotional competence, how do we measure if a student's effective communicator and global citizen, I can tell you that some of those elements, like global citizen, there's a heavy emphasis on civics and civic education. To be an effective communicator, we can find a lot of that within the context of some of our learning standards, whether that's world language or ELA. That's a component part of the standards already. When we talk about cultural competence and social emotional competence, the cultural competence component we can find within the culturally responsive sustaining education framework that already exists in New York State, as well as our social emotional learning benchmarks, which again are two broader documents the state has had out for quite some time, that I would imagine when they release more details on all of this, we'll have a bigger or better sense about what those two elements of the portrait of a graduate really will entail. Ultimately, years from now, when we get to the point of having students graduate with this portrait fulfilled, we are anticipating that we'll have either a series of rubrics or guidance to help districts determine how do we assess whether or not students have effectively fulfilled each one of those different components. I have no details, none of us do, so it's kind of nebulous at this point. And one thing I guess I do need to preface, which I'll get to at the end of the presentation. All of this was presented in November to the Board of Regents from the State Education Department. It has not been fully adopted by the Board of Regents. We wanted to go back out to the field to get more feedback and details, so this is still very much an anticipated piece that we'll be moving toward, but again, it has not been fully adopted by the Board of Regents. So if we were to compare what they're proposing to what we currently have, you can see on the left those three diploma types, the twofold system of earning credits with passing Regents exams for credit towards graduation. Districts also have the ability to add local requirements. So for example, some districts might have a service learning component that students have to do before they graduate, while others might explicitly require certain coursework like financial literacy or other things. As we think about what the state is proposing, we move away from three diploma types to a singular diploma type. You might wonder, well, how do we then distinguish or differentiate between students' diploma types? It seems like a one-size-fits-all. The way in which the state will do that, I'll show you some ways that they plan to do that in a future slide, is to go through a process of using seals and or endorsements to differentiate one diploma from the next. So currently, you might have a Regents diploma, but you might have a Regents diploma with advanced designation. We'll have the ability to do some of those things based on what districts are able to offer in the form of seals, endorsements, or pathways. Evidence-based, so this is a bit of a distinction between what we currently have. So you pass your course, you pass the Regents exam, that's the way you get credit. In this new system the state is proposing, it's multiple means. So although you might hear Regents exams are being eliminated, they're not. What's being eliminated is the requirement to successfully pass a Regents exam. What the state is proposing is alternate pathways for students to demonstrate competency or understanding around. So you might not be successful on a Regents exam, but that's the route you're going to take to demonstrate competency. But the reality is that there could be an alternative experience or product or project that a student might be able to complete that would satisfy the requirements for that course aside from passing the Regents exam. Again, not a lot of details on what that will look like, but that's the proposed pathway. And then the final component, districts must confer diplomas to students who satisfy those requirements. In other words, if students fulfill what the state is saying that is part of the portrait of the graduate, as well as all of the different credit requirements and competencies as they've outlined, we have to confer a diploma to the students. In other words, if you had that financial literacy or some other service learning component, if students have satisfied everything the state is saying, even if you have a locally determined additional measure, we're still to confer a diploma for a student that satisfies what the state is saying you must complete. Clear as mud, yeah. So, how do we do that locally here in Canandaigua? Well, we have a range of things that are currently in place and that we're already beginning to explore. So obviously the IB program is one way for a seal and or endorsement to be added to a diploma. But there are also three other pathways that we need to begin to explore, which is something called the Seal of Civic Readiness, the Seal of Biliteracy, and then there's something called the 4+1 Arts pathway, which is pathways through certain coursework in a sequence of courses for either the arts or music that you have to apply for to be able to offer within your district. We are exploring these already through our social studies program review process with the seal of bioliteracy that's already underway. And we have some meetings set up with our teacher leaders of those core programs to begin that process, knowing that if we want to be able to offer a range of opportunities for our students here, we have to find these different pathways, apply for them, and get approval so that we have that opportunity for students to have a way to differentiate their diploma from the singular statewide diploma as it's currently outlined. So, in theory, it's sort of an if then and shown by, so I won't read everything on here, but in general, what the state is saying is that if we can adopt what a portrait of a graduate is, we can redefine and expand credits and expand opportunities for students. We kind of remove barriers for students in relationship to assessment requirements that might be a mitigating factor in earning a diploma, and move to a singular high school diploma that we will have students be more well-rounded and better equipped to leave high school with the skills and competencies that they need to be successful. And then ultimately, there'll be a range of measures to do that, not just I passed my class and passed the test, I should be ready for everything. The concept here is to have more authentic, project-based, real-world opportunities so that students are demonstrating mastery in a variety of ways, not just from passing your classes and passing assessments. So here's our timeline, which is a quite interesting timeline. They're calling this the planning year. The plan's not even approved yet. So we're gonna try to do our best and wait for more information from the state once that, and we're anticipating that it will be approved by the Board of Regents. But we're right now in the phase of, we're knocking on the door of March, which is a really critical point of the year when we're already thinking about planning for next year. This information, these updates will be really helpful for us to be able to move forward, because when you think about the concept, there's a lot of layers to this. There's curriculum, there's assessment, there's coursework offerings, there's the applications for the range of seals and endorsements. We really want to get moving on these things, but we can't move any faster than the information that we have. So we're in our planning year, and then phases 1 and 2 are actually two-year chunks. So you can see how it's outlined here, with the anticipation that by the fall of 2029, we are full implementation, singular diploma, but also a singular statewide transcript. So there's a higher ed component to this. Many districts have their own information, learning management, or not, excuse me, student information systems. There's, I think, somewhere between 15 and 20 different systems we use Infinite Campus. The state is working to try to make sure that all of those programs can generate a singular high school transcript, which will be interesting to see how we pull that off. So, we talked about the planning year. Again, not much change. They're gonna release and approve and adopt the portrait of a graduate we're anticipating. They've already done this piece with support networks in terms of establishing work groups and advisory councils, hosted typically by BOCEs, but you can see they're slowly starting to build momentum behind the change. That first phase, that first 2-year piece, again, you'll notice, release the portrait of a graduate with rubrics and guidance. We have not seen any examples of any of that information, but you'll notice a couple of changes with learning expectations. First, they're not suggesting that they're going to change learning standards. They have spent the last 10 years changing a range of learning, like literally every discipline has had a standards change. But they're saying that they're going to reformat and prioritize learning standards, because I think the thinking is going to be that with those competencies or projects or whatever it is you're gonna need to complete or create to demonstrate competency outside of a Regents exam, it's likely a certain set of prioritized standards per discipline is gonna be highlighted. But that's a major change, because if we're thinking about our courses, if we don't have those learning standards prioritized, and we don't have assessments or projects to back up the prioritized learning, we've got to create all that. So it's a lot of work to be done. You'll notice the second bullet point, required instruction on financial literacy and climate education. I need to be clear that required instruction is not the same thing as a course. So we can weave in financial literacy, and we have a range of courses that offer financial literacy at our academy and at the middle school. And climate education is also embedded in some of the earth and space sciences. So again, what all that entails, don't quite know. And then they'll begin to talk about with the different cohorts of students students as they start their 9th grade year, what are some of the new credit requirements they're going to encounter, and then they'll give us all sorts of support, it'll be great. And then when we get to the second phase, second 2-year chunk, again, as we're getting to this point, by the summer of 2029, you need to be close to having that singular diploma, sunsetting of current diploma requirements, being prepared for seals and endorsements, the things I talked about earlier, and then we get into redefining credits, but also noticing that students entering grade 9 in 2027, they will be required to take one course in career and technical education, which could include financial literacy, but the financial literacy piece is not a requirement. So there's a range of CTE courses in tech and business that we offer, so students can satisfy that in a variety of ways, but that requirement to have one course will be there. So again, by fall of 2029, those students entering grade 9, they will be fully under that new system. Singular diploma, statewide transcript. We will need to document proficiency and portrait of a graduate and all of those prioritized learning standards. So there's gonna be a range of record keeping and documentation that we're gonna need to keep, and essentially look at it this way, almost case manage per student at a higher level than we probably ever have had to ensure that they satisfy all those requirements. And then as we get to the support piece, again, helping us with the new transcript, prioritizing those learning standards, and then ultimately helping us to see what are best teaching and learning practices associated with helping students meet the portrait of a graduate. This is just another visual to help you understand, and when they're referring to cohorts, often we hear about graduating cohort, we think about the year the students graduate. When you see cohort here, they're talking about students that begin high school in 9th grade. That's kind of the other end of the spectrum. So you can see with everything I've kind of outlined this evening, you can see how we have those 2-year phases, those 2-year chunks of those 2-year terms, and you can see how it slowly builds to that 2029 cohort, that for those students starting 9th grade in 2029, we'll be at that full implementation point. Again, need to stress, this is all not approved, but we're anticipating approval at some point. So in terms of our own next steps, we have to monitor for that approval. And these 2 bullet points are kind of the bigger pieces that we have to really begin to plan around, and that's the part that is challenging this time of year. We really want to get ahead of this work. We know these changes are coming, we want to prepare our staff, and we want our staff to be prepared so they can be in a place where they can help students successfully navigate all of these different changes. And so, if approved, we were gonna have to do things like, what are the rubrics? What is the guidance? What's the professional learning? What do these prioritized learning standards documents look like? And then ultimately, and in subsequent years, we're gonna have to think about summertime for teachers to work and create. We're gonna have to think about release time during the school year so that we can ensure everybody is a part of it. And there may be things that we don't even know about yet. There might be a need for a range of collaboration regionally for some of this work. We may have requests from districts to partner with us to try to help us learn and understand how we're doing certain things, because they may or may not have the same capacity that the district like Canandaigua does. So that'll be interesting to see how that impacts the region. Where we might be able to offer IB and all those seals and endorsements, a smaller district may not be able to. So that part remains to be seen. So I wish I had more answers. I've got a lot of information, a lot of questions myself, but I want to give you a chance to ask any questions if you have.
So I've been trying to watch this from the other end of the receiver of a lot of Canandaigua and other regional graduates. Have you gotten any clarity on one of the things that I see coming out of this shift? We, at the Box of Bricks, we call it credit by competency. But this kind of model really opens the door to something like that. For example, just in my other world, you have a kid here that's really good at coding and that sort of thing, and they don't need to sit in that class, but they can make you a great app for your phone. Can you now, as a district, give credit to that kid for an equivalency? With all these competencies, I just see that like an explosion of that kind of thing, where a kid could learn some of that somewhere else other than Canandaigua or on YouTube or, you know, almost anywhere, particularly for technical skills, and chew through a lot of that outside of the classroom environment.
So So for lack of a better term, almost audit courses and simply just complete the competency and say, yep, I have this prior knowledge. I don't have an answer to that. Because I think one of the components here too, and this may be associated with the redefining graduation requirements, is that whole seat time piece. Do you actually have to sit physically in the courses to earn the credit for them? You know, again, that's, I think, some of the guidance that they would provide to us, and the rubrics themselves may lend themselves to us being able to assess whether or not a student can or can't do that. We know we have students that have pretty packed schedules, and they get packed because they have to physically sit in the courses, where they don't know if the state will accept a student to essentially complete the competency, to demonstrate the competency so that they can earn the credit. I don't know yet.
Right, so how it sort of works now at whatever level is the student understands this part of the curriculum, so we push them ahead into something that would be challenging. And, you know, they go forward. But again, in this model, I think it's really important to understand what's the vision there. If we're pushing toward demonstrated competency, then, and that's the goal, then you could have a student that has, you know, specialized capacity in art or coding or whatever, and be able to show that portfolio and satisfy that graduation requirement without the seat time.
Which I would say for some of those seals and endorsements, that's how they're organized, that there are things that students could potentially be doing outside the hours of the school day, especially if there's a service component to it, that as opposed to just physically sitting in a class to earn points towards earning the seal, there's a lot of that could be applied outside the hours of the school day. So maybe that's the wiggle room for some of those things, but what I don't know is that they would outright say, if you have a student that has a high level of prior knowledge or experience, can they simply complete the competency or the project or whatever it is that's gonna be used to measure that, and simply get credit that way? That part I don't know.
And then I'm hoping you'll get some answers out of the state, and this is why I'm asking you. But then the next thing that comes after that is if that student can then generate that competency and show that they have that competency, then what does that do for how the district schedules what they have and all of that, right? So if you have a certain portion of your student body that tests out, demonstrates out by competency, then what happens? How do you plan for that?
Great question. It just, what it could mean is that we're looking at kind of like non-traditional schedules. But I think to my point earlier about the higher level of record keeping and sort of case management, it will be a different level of need for certainly our counselors, and potentially for maybe even our curriculum area lead teachers. Because in the areas where there are seals and endorsements, we're gonna have to make sure we're tracking that information to make sure students are satisfying all those requirements. It isn't as clean as, I passed the course, I passed the test, and I'm good.
And then my last comment, and I don't know if I'm on camera with this or not, but good luck having the state have one transcript. I'll believe it when I see it.
No.
What's our current graduation rate?
Current graduation rate last year, I believe, was 91 or 92%. I don't remember off the top of my head.
So 92%, and that's amongst the 3 current possible diplomas, correct?
Correct.
Do we have any rough idea of where we break down amongst those 3? Percent-wise, of that 92%, how many are, as a Regents with Honors, what do they call them anymore? It used to be Regents
Advanced
with
distinction.
Honors. and
Yeah,
local.
we've been able to track that data over, like with every cohort, that's data that we regularly have.
So roughly, where are we with that 92% amongst those 3 types?
I don't know off the CDOS credential off the top of my head, but with our advanced designation, typically, just, it ranges in that, let's say, like 40-ish% range.
Because what?
It changes for every cohort.
Everything I just heard puts a knot in my stomach, because they're dumbing down our students. They're making everyone, back to where we were before the Regents came out. It really didn't matter what you did in school, you had a diploma. Here, it doesn't matter what you did in school, you got a diploma. With the Regents, you knew you met a certain standard. Advanced, Regents, you met an even better standard. We're taking that away, we're dumbing it down. Same thing with teacher education. We we required teachers to go through and take tests, do videos, all that. Well, not many can pass it. Now we don't do it anymore. A lot of that stuff's gone out the wayside. New York is just dumbing down our students. The state is going right down the tubes. It's really, to me, this is terrible.
Well, I guess what I would say is this. Some of our teachers, I think if you ask them, being able to think about their classrooms in a different way where there's more opportunities for application of their knowledge, of what the kids are actually learning, sometimes is constrained by, I've got a readings exam, I gotta make sure I cover all this stuff. And I think that allowing for a balance between traditional assessment, which is the readings exam, again, they're not going anywhere, but the requirement to pass them, can we find ways for students to demonstrate understanding through rubrics that are linked to standards, perhaps will cause our teachers to feel like they have some flexibility in how they engage students in the learning and assess students in learning, so it isn't always the traditional or typical, pencil and paper test. So I think it will be interesting, and maybe our teachers will see that differently, but there's room for assessment, of course.
Well, I don't think it's so much geared towards candidate. We're at 92%, our students do well. Look at the city of Rochester. They'll make these kids graduate. All of a sudden, their graduation rate's gonna skyrocket, because they can get around stuff now. They can make up something, oh, yeah, they pass. I mean, it really, it's taking the state, well, you had a level here you had to graduate at. And if you did really well, you graduated with a better diploma than, yeah. Now, everyone's gonna get the same diploma, they're gonna have the same transcript. It just irritates the heck out of me.
And so I guess for, like you said, Canandaigua may be a different story from a neighbor north, south, east, or west of us. I think what we're gonna lean into is continuing to find ways for us to have the comprehensive set of offerings that we're really proud of. And that's why those pathways, like I'm very interested in exploring those with our teacher leaders, and they are too, because in the spaces and places where we can differentiate what we do for kids, and so that it isn't just the one size fits all, we wanna offer that to students. And so I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think that there will be an opportunity for us to maybe partner with other districts so that they might learn from some of the things that we do. The trouble, and we've asked questions around this, is really gonna be just the shared capacity. So whether or not, if you're the size of Canandaigua, or you're a smaller district where there's like one teacher per grade level or content area, the ability to kind of do some of these pieces is really gonna be challenging. And so the state's been asked questions about the equity and access around that. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of resources or feedback they give us to, allow us to differentiate a little bit, but then also sort of maintain the standard of around graduation that we currently have. So they're fair points.
Jen?
Okay, so tell me if I'm getting way ahead of the information you have. But you were talking about, and I was sort of had this horrible picture of trying to case manage individual students with multiple learning goals in multiple areas. Do you think that maybe in the back of people's heads is that the CALCs will be able to, or individual instructors, departments, will be able to go through courses and look at what they're doing and say, okay, so if you successfully complete the final project, or if you pass the final exam, that will be evidence of these specific learning goals, and that if that's in a system somewhere, then maybe it doesn't have to be checked off individually by counselors?
Maybe. So I think one thing we're learning a little bit about in relationship to our student management system is, well, we have to harness it perhaps more indifferently than we currently are. And that's only because what's being potentially demanded of us isn't necessary. So we're fully capable of recording grades and Regents exam scores, goes right into the system. If there's a way for us to replicate some of what is gonna be expected from us from a reporting standpoint, perhaps we can use the power of that tool to do that more effectively. I still think there's gonna be the need for counselors to continually meet with students to ensure that they're on the right pathway. It does have a little bit of a higher ed college feel, because, you know, you could change your major or courses or anything at any point, and if there are certain pathway seals or endorsements you wanna pursue, you know, that might be something that you have to explore with a student on a one-to-one level. So, we're doing that already with credits and other things, but, the different way to assess, coupled with, the singular diploma and the data tracking associated with that, I would love to see some examples to better answer that question, but I would anticipate we might have to think about how we're currently doing that to meet that demand.
That, was like Jen, right? I'm thinking about my own background and thinking about how we manage some of this, and we have systems that will track it, because I can't imagine trying to do this individually. But I also understand the need to meet on a regular basis, because if you change your path, now you have to think about, can you do it in the time that you're planning to do it? Thank you.
Thank you.
So, you indicated that the state hasn't given you any sort of ideas as to when professional learning is gonna occur. Can you ensure that maybe we will continue to get some professional learning around what this is? I mean, can we have this every year for the next 4 or 5 years as it rolls out?
Reasonable.
I would imagine we will need more frequent updates, yes. Just given the scope of it all.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
of course.
Thank you, Matt.
Nice job,
Thank you.
Matt.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right, read consensus agenda and supplemental officer motions, please. Milton, Jenny, questions or comments? All in favor? That carries unanimously, thank you. Milton, will you report out on audit, please?
Sure, so we met on Friday, the audit committee met, we had a clean report from our claims auditor, and then we spent some time reviewing proposals from our RFP for our internal and for our independent auditor. Committee's made a recommendation, you should see that in the March meeting. Matt gave us some feedback on what we know about the early state aid numbers. And then Cullen provided us with a update on tax collection for this past year.
Thank you. John, safety?
Yeah, safety met a couple weeks ago. A lot of discussion varied around nurses going to scenes of bus accidents that are off our property. We're having a turnover in nursing. There is no written policy, local or state, that they have found. They're looking into, see if there is something. They're looking at what other districts do. As you can expect, the newer people coming on board don't want to. They don't want to leave home, leave wherever they are if a bus accident occurs, and go there. They feel that that's too much of a liability to put on an RN or an LPN. Really, it should be an EMS question, but we have always been sending someone there. So, the more seasoned nurses have questioned, should it continue? The newer nurses are saying, why do we do it in the first place? So that was quite a bit of discussion. Another one was dealing with EpiPens. Apparently now the new law, correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, but anywhere where there's a potential of 1,000 people or more in one location, there has to be an available EpiPen. Like we have the AEDs now, you have to have an EpiPen 1,000 or more. But you don't have to have it all over, so you'll have one at the entrance of the elementary, the primary, they'll be in the AED boxes. They're gonna be replacing all the AEDs in the year coming up. They're talking about, is it heated or refrigerated or both?
So the one at the academy will be both.
Okay, yeah, so they have to be temperature regulated for the EpiPens. And the question is, who's paying for those EpiPens? Because they're very expensive. So that was a big discussion. They're still working on that. Our favorite topic of lice was brought up again. We're still going round and round on that. I'm not gonna say they're scratching their heads about it, but when we have Vern and Brian working on lice, we know we're safe. I didn't include you. And the last thing was they're working on updates, annual updates to the school safety plan.
Great, thank you. Questions?
Can I just say, Brian, I believe we have a formalized plan for bus accidents and for lice.
Yeah. So for bus accidents, I did talk to, Sprague at the.
Sprague.
EMS, and, they will be at the scene. We're gonna have an administrator that reports to the scene, whether it be Seth, or a principal, or Jamie, or myself. And we'll be authorizing EMS to do what they need to do to check the kids, or, whether they don't need to check the kids, so.
I mean, that's assuming it happens in Canada Ambulance District.
Sure.
But,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
we still,
the difficulty too is that if EMS is evaluating a student, like truly evaluating a student, they won't release the student to anybody but their parent or guardian. And if you have a bus of 50 students and there was a fender bender that nobody even felt, that's the difficulty. You know, they don't, you know, the EMS, they won't want to evaluate the kid and say they're fine unless they're able to release that child to their parents, which is logistically almost impossible.
What he said they are willing to do though is, if it doesn't appear as though there's any true injuries, they're more than willing to get on the bus, walk up and down the aisle, make sure everyone's alert, make sure there's no clear sign of some kind of injury that we can then assess once they get back to the building.
And then the lice protocol, will vary by building. As you know, primary and elementary students are much more hands-on than maybe, high school students. So, Vern worked closely with our nurses to develop a plan, that all the nurses felt was safe and they support. So that plan just last week, I believe, and they solidified that finally.
there was some discussion, if there is a bus accident, that driver has to be tested. Just as a precaution, to make sure they didn't have anything in their system at the time. I guess that is a policy, either state law or policy, that's what Seth was talking about.
It's the Department of Transportation policy, and I'm not gonna quote it exactly right now, but essentially if there's, I don't know how to word it, so I don't wanna missay it, but if there's substantial injury as a result of that accident, we could have an accident where, we might clip a side view mirror that the kids didn't even know there was an accident. The bus didn't move, there was nothing that happened, but there's damage to a bus, so it's a bus accident. Something like that wouldn't require the driver to be tested.
Now, is that a policy of ours, or is that? Cause right,
It's
according
a
to
DOT,
Seth-
isn't it? I believe it's DOT.
Cause according to what Seth said at the meeting, and they had apparently a bus backed into a mailbox, or something minor, on one of the narrow streets, they had to go and have that driver tested, even though it was simply a very minor property damage accident, because that is the protocol. And they said that they would wait until the route was over to test. But then I questioned that because if there is something there, you just allow that person to drive those kids home. So you really, if you're gonna truly test everybody, you can't let them continue to drive. So I guess we gotta make sure that we have a set policy in place, because according to Seth, we don't.
There's two pieces to that, and Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, there's the DOT requirements, and anything beyond DOT requirements would have to be collectively bargained. And so, without it being collectively bargained, and if it doesn't fit within the DOT requirements, we're not authorized to do it. Brian, did I capture that right?
Exactly.
So you just gotta make sure, because right now, it sounds like that's up in the air.
It is a little bit, and that's why we changed kind of our practice of sending Seth and or sending Jamie or I or principal to the scene to assess.
Anything else?
That's it.
Right, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Megan, Milton, all in favor?